Good morning. My name is Jay Huckabee, and I'm the Chief HR Executive for Ascension, Texas. Thank you for joining us today for Leadership Austin's Engage series, highlighting the multi-generational workforce. At Ascension, Texas, we are fortunate to employ associates across generations to provide safe, compassionate, personalized care to all. We welcome all individuals to serve with us. Ascension is committed to providing a safe space for associates to be their authentic self. We will work to better understand you and your needs so that you can reach your full potential. Today, you will hear from panelists about the myths, challenges, and opportunities of 5 generations working side by side. Thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon. I'm Santa Henderson with Austin PBS. Welcome to ATX Together, the Engage series. Today's topic is the multi-generational workforce. Whether you're a baby boomer, Gen Z, millennial, or Gen X, we've got a panel of experts with information you can use in this seemingly ever-changing workplace. Let's get started with our panelists. Denise Villa is the CEO and founder of the Center for Generational Kinetics. Joanna Ortiz is president and CEO of the Austin Young Chamber. And Matt Burnt is the head of Indeed's Job Search Academy. Our experts will guide us through this conversation, and hopefully you can gain some insight about your career path and what you can do currently in the workforce. We'll begin with our experts by asking each panelist to give a brief description of their background. Denise, let's begin with you.
Hi, Santa. Thank you. So I'm co-founder and CEO of the Center for Generational Kinetics. So we're a global research and strategy firm. And we were founded really to focus on separating myth from truth through data. So that's what we do pretty much all day long, is work with companies around the globe, really making sure that they have the facts to their situations, or putting together a multi-generational workforce, as today's presentation will be talking about.
Thank you. Joanna?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Joanna Ortiz, President and CEO of the Austin Young Chamber. We are in a mission to support young professionals here in Central Texas, whether you are preparing to enter the workforce or you are a senior manager ready to serve in your community. We serve a wide range of young professionals and businesses looking to recruit and retain this talent.
Thanks, Joanna. Matt Burnt?
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Burnt. I'm with Indeed, and at Indeed, we help people get jobs. And I personally do that by leading Indeed's Job Search Academy. It's an educational curriculum to help job seekers learn how to look for jobs, prepare their resumes, interviews, negotiate fair compensation, and manage their careers. I've been helping people get jobs for about 30 years, most of it here in Austin, as a career coach as well, and as a career center director.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks to each of you for joining us. Now, as we all know, we often hear talk about, oh, he's a baby boomer, or she's acting just like a millennial, or she's Gen Z, or Gen Xers think they're the best group. Of all of these opinions, people have different opinions about them and how they relate to each other in the workforce. It can lead to many different factors for people as they navigate their careers. So here's a real description of what defines them, and we'll move into what it means in the workforce for different people based on their generations. Now, these subject matter experts will guide us through this conversation throughout this next hour. I'll begin with Denise by asking her to describe the generations.
All right, thanks, Santa. So just to start us off, I want to make sure everybody understands that generations don't fit neatly in this box. Just because you're born in these birth years doesn't mean that you're exactly this typical person of that generation. So what we like to say is are really clues that lend a lens into specific attitudes, preferences, due to the way that you grew up, geography, societal norms, etc. during that time. So we have Gen Z. They're our newest generation. They're born 1977 to 2010. Go Gen Zers. Next up, we have millennials. Millennials were born 1977 to 1990. Gen X our next group, that is me. I'm very excited to be a Gen Xer, 1965 to 1976. We rarely get talked about, so I'll just say that. And then baby boomers, 1946 to 1964. They are our oldest generation that are mostly in the workforce. And then we still do have some traditionalists, which we didn't include here, but we do still have some working traditionalists that are in the workforce as well.
Thank you, Denise. So we have the details on how this conversation is framed. So let's talk about what it means socially and culturally based on the descriptions. Joanna, I'll start with you. Why is it important to recognize these differences as they relate to us on social and cultural levels?
Yeah, I mean, as Denise kind of pointed out, we all experience life and society and our work life in very different ways. And it really depends what year you were born, what year you entered the workforce, college, and all of that. And so what we see a lot with Gen Z, I myself am a millennial. I was able to see life before the internet was mainstream and after, where we are now. Gen Z, they are the digital generation. And so the way that they interact and engage with the digital aspect of our lives is much different than to those who were introduced to Facebook and back in the day. So how this manifests itself is, young Gen Z isn't just on their phones. They are living life vicariously through others' experiences online. So that is a real distinctive factor in this generation that we're seeing.
Okay, Joanna, I'll follow up with you. You talked about the Gen Zers being the digital generation. So how does that relate to them in the workforce, for example, when they're working with all types of people?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it shows up a lot in the way that they interact with brands, with companies, and the values that they see, and a lot of these, whatever organization that they're working for. But I do believe Matt has a really good insight on this aspect, and I would love to hand it over to him.
All right, Gen Z brings a really neat energy into the workplace just because of the fact that they were almost born with an iPhone or a PDA in their hand, and that's how they tend to interact with the world in life and in business as well. They don't see a need for there be a delineation between the virtual world and the in-person world, and they like to slide back and forth between those two worlds when they're interacting at work or as a consumer seamlessly. And they don't understand why there are those barriers sometimes in work. So they can bring great innovation and adoption of new tools. They can coach older folks in the workforce like me on how to utilize those new tools in new ways. They're very solutions oriented in their use of technology and their approach to work. So they can bring a great energy.
And Matt, that was the next question that I was about to ask. So when we talk about the workplace, is it good? Is it bad in terms of Gen Zs working with baby boomers, in terms of their relationships and how they coexist in those spaces?
I like to look at how the generations understand and complement each other, particularly in the workplace. When you think about all of the different generations that are present, as Denise said, the traditionalists of the silent generation is still there, though in fewer numbers. There's still a number of baby boomers that are out there. And I've often looked at the generations from their approach to work and life and that whole work-life balance. When you look at the baby boomer generation, so I'm going to start back with the baby boomers first. This is that work comes first, sort of all work, no play generation. They came in looking to climb the corporate ladder, that 30 years, get your gold watch and a pension. And they really respect the system and that notion of your experience equates to respect and authority and hierarchy. But they're also that generation that was the first group that got hit by layoffs and that raised the Gen Xers. The Gen Xers, who are those classic latchkey kids. Now, I will say in full transparency, I'm going to be what you would call a cusper. I got some baby boomer in me and I've got some Gen Z. So I aligned and identify with various aspects of both of those generations. But when it comes to work, the classic Gen Xer by definition is pretty independent because many of them felt they raised themselves. So they work very independent in the workforce and say, just don't worry about it, I'll do it myself. And when it comes to work-life balance, it's finding a greater balance than they saw in their preceding generation. When you slide down into the world of the millennials, these are the folks classically defined as having had those helicopter parents, or the folks who had multiple things that they participated in all the time. So they're your natural collaborators within the organization. They come in with a level of confidence that may seem brash to the generations that preceded them, because they were told they can succeed and do whatever it is that they want to do and become whatever it is that they want to do. But they also got slapped with reality of some recessions as well and had to deal with that reality. From a work-life balance standpoint, this is the generation that is starting to look for more flexibility, not just balance, but flexibility. And they're not willing to give up their lifestyle for their career. And then along came Gen Z. And Gen Zs, who spent a lot of their time working at home throughout COVID, look at work completely differently. They observed the decisions that their siblings and their parents and their grandparents made, and they're shrewd managers of their life and their career. And they're trying to make good decisions actively in the present. They don't define work traditionally the way I did or the way I do. They look at it very differently, and they're saying, how does work fit into the life that I'm trying to create? And I define work in a variety of different ways. So I might be multitasking. I might have a variety of gigs or different ways that I am bringing work into my life, and they're prioritizing what they're doing in work with their other social causes. It's not how do I fit into the work world, but how is work going to fit into the world that I am working to create for myself. And that causes some natural conflicts or potential conflicts, but interesting dynamics when you bring all the different generations together in the workplace.
Thank you, Matt. That is really some great insight. And it leads me towards this. When we talk about the workplace and all of these different people, I've seen situations where you have an employee who's very quiet, keeps to himself, doesn't have a lot to say or do with other people. But then I've seen them attach themselves to, say, a baby boomer, an older employee, and seems to want to help them with projects, help them get along in the office. So what is that? Is there a word for that? Denise?
Well, yeah. So, what we found in our studies, first of all, is it started with millennials, and millennials had a appreciation. Many millennials, so once again, not all, but they had appreciation for traditionalists. They found that the traditionalists listened to them more, had patience with them, and maybe some traditionalists were able to teach them, and they respected that. And so there became a link with this younger generation to this older generation. Now in the workforce, we see very similar things going on with Gen Z and baby boomers. Who have a similar style that we have in this conversation that we go together. And so it's kind of like almost a little bit like the grandparent effect. Like many people have a similar relationship with a grandparent, somebody that's older with them that they respect, that grandparent really listens to them. And so there are some of those remnants that come into the workforce with some of those kind of conversations or engagements with each other.
Thank you. Now, Joanna, I know you work with a lot of the younger generation. What are you hearing about that phenomena, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I definitely resonate with that what you just talked about, Denise. I've definitely, as I came into my career, I had that a lot of experience in looking to the older generation to guide me and mentor me. But as I've grown in my career and now I'm managing teams, and a lot of them are Gen Z. One of the things that I'm seeing, and Matt alluded to this a lot, is really finding that balance between I work to live, not live to work, right? And so I think one of the common misconceptions we hear about Gen Z is that Gen Z just doesn't want to work. And again, not to generalize everyone, but that may be, I think, a big tension between this generation and perhaps the older generation. And something that I'm noticing, and something that I alluded to earlier is about this concept of values. I think that is what a lot of this generation wants to see in their organization. It's not that they don't want to work, it's that they want the organization to really demonstrate to them that they also value a life, that they also value family, that they also value taking rest, and that they also value to pay attention to what's going on in society. So I think that's a lot of the tension that we're seeing. And so I don't have a name for that necessarily, but I think that common, when we think about how Gen Z shows up to work, thinking about reframing that a little bit is really, really crucial.
Great, Joanna. So let's just keep on that path. So we're talking about the social and cultural connections. We're talking about the different ways, styles of which these generations work. So let's talk about some of those myths. And I know, Matt, you'll have a wealth of experience in dealing with, what are some of the facts versus the myths when we talk about different generations and in the workplace?
Well, Joanna just touched on one of those, this notion that Gen Z doesn't want to work. They just define work differently. And they work really, really, really hard at things that they're passionate about. They also get this knock for being a little brash sometimes because they have opinions. And they feel that if they've got an opinion, they don't necessarily think they're going to get their way, but they think they have the right to have their voice heard. And they will voice it within the workplace, but they'll also voice it on social media and through influencers, and have had a great impact doing that. Gen Xers can often get the knock of being a little aloof or a little bit detached. They're not. They're just approaching work a little bit differently. What I love, and sort of a definition that I like to come up with, is called reciprocal mentoring. When you see somebody who's in the baby boom generation working closely in the workplace with someone who is in Gen Z, it's great when this works because it's the baby boomer saying, I know I have a lot to offer in terms of knowledge and experience and coaching and mentoring to help you develop professionally within our organization or elsewhere. But you have a lot that I can learn to help me better understand whether it's new technology, new modes of communication. And so they get to mentor each other reciprocally. And I think that breaks down a lot of these myths and barriers that we see when we sort of drop generations into boxes and label them.
Denise, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, I agree with Matt and Joanna. I think Gen Z gets a bad rap. I mean, they not as bad as millennials got in the media, but Gen Z is one, and we've been following them in my firm for about 8 years now, 10, maybe 9 years, before really any research firm was following their habits. And when we first started with them, we said, this generation is a generation that wants to go out there and work. They want to prove themselves. They want to save money. They want to be in the job force, give something significant to that job force, but then also come back and give something significant to their own life. And I think that's great. I think this generation is redefining many things for us right now, and people need to listen.
Okay, Matt, let me go back to you now. Based on what we just heard about the myths and the real truths about these different generations, how does this, or does it at all, play into recruiting and retention when we talk about people trying to seek positions? So if you have any intel on that.
Oh gosh, yes. It's really, really important from a talent attraction standpoint, because if you look at the sort of the demographics of the workforce as we move towards 2030, the lion's share of the workforce is going to be Gen Z and millennials. Denise, you know the numbers better than I will, but it's got to be close to 80 or 90%. And when you're trying to attract and then keep talent, you've got to deliver a message to candidates that is more than just what's in the job description. They're interested in evaluating you as a company, what you stand for, the kind of work culture that you offer to your candidates, the kind of opportunities for advancement. So they're not just looking at the job description, they're looking to see whether or not they can see themselves working for your company. So whether it's your careers page or your presence in various different job search media where you're trying to connect with job seekers, you've got to be delivering messages that say, we understand you. We're creating a workplace where you will find fulfillment. It isn't just about the job description.
Denise?
I'll add to that. I was going to say it's not just about the job description, but make sure that everything is also linear with that. If you're showing videos of your workplace and you're saying Gen Z are welcome here, and nobody in the video is a Gen Z or somebody of that age range, it's hard to say that they're welcomed here, right? People want to see people like themselves somewhat within somewhere that they're walking into. So display that. Also, you have a very savvy job marketplace. They're going online and they're looking to see your reviews. How are employees talking about your companies? What are you standing for? That not just what you're saying, but what other people are saying that you stand for. So be very cognizant of that as you're kind of approaching and recruiting new people.
And Joanna, you'd be great to add here. When we talk about the Gen Zs, what are they looking for? What are you looking for when you're trying to make that next move in your career?
I 100% agree with Matt and Denise. And I think the only thing I add is just to touch on just their cultural and social experience through the digital age. It's not just for fun. I think the experience that they have, that they live their life online. I think if there's like a word that could define this generation is transparency. So they don't want the performative DEI headlines. They don't want the performative ESG headlines from your company page. They want to see some impact. They want to see that the hiring process is inclusive, is, it's demonstrative or a foreshadowing to what the culture and the values of the organization, that it's lived out. So I think that's really important to note. And yeah, I could talk about that forever, but I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. So we're talking about Gen Zs and millennials. Let's move it back a bit to the Gen X and the baby boomers. Now, I'm Gen Xer, so I have to represent, we're still in the workforce. So Matt, I'll start with you. What are some things that, when we're recruiting and trying to have retention can be done to reach those groups?
Well, how do you reach people like me and Denise? We're at a different stage in our life than our than millennials are, and that Gen Z are. So we're looking for different things. But we're also learning from those generations as well and adopting some of the things that we're seeing that work for them. And we're trying to incorporate those things into their lives as well. This notion of flexibility, I think, is something that is appealing across the generations. And it is for us because we're, I look at myself right now as sort of, I'm on the cusp of that, but it's when our kids are growing. So we're looking for stability in roles. We're still looking for opportunities to create and opportunities to grow. But I think to share some of our experience as well with the younger members of our teams, and to sort of often move away from an operational tactical role into an advisory type role.
Okay, Matt, we have a question from one of our viewers.
Sure.
And Kathy Jones says she's a Gen X. She works 50 to 60 hours a week, but some of her younger employees are asking for 32-hour work weeks. So how do you address that if you're in management?
Oh my gosh, I love this question because it really gets at the heart of generational differences and us trying to use the same language to say different things. We Gen Xers, we're used to working, and our car is there before the boss arrives, and it's still there after the boss leaves because presence is important. Gen Z doesn't see it that way. They think if I can get the work that you're asking me to do done in a shorter period of time, why do I need to be there for 40 to 50 hours? The issue and the question here is around they're looking for that flexibility. They want to get the work done, the work they're being paid to do, not a bunch of other things beyond that unless it gets brought into the scope of their work. But they're saying, if I can do this in 32 hours, why don't I do that? And they look around and they see a lot of time that's not necessarily being used. They equate it with results more so than presence. And the way they ask that question is, can I have a 32-hour work week instead of a 40-hour work week that's going to turn into a 50-hour work week? As a Gen Xer, but cusper, I've learned a lot from that about focusing more on results and less on presence. And I think that's where that question comes from.
Thank you. Denise?
Oh, I agree. I agree with Matt. I think especially, during this time with COVID, where so much of our work experiences have changed. We have a lot of companies that have started to continue to change their models and really focus on the mental health aspect of their people, going to 4-day work weeks, giving more flexibility of when you want to work those hours, making 2 days of the week still at home, et cetera. But I think it's really also is going to be very up to the community at the organization to create, these are the goals that need to be reached. If you can do it in this time frame, great. If you can't do it in this time frame, then we need to have another discussion. And so getting rid of all those extracurricular meetings, all of those times away that are not necessarily used for the day is, I don't know, sometimes that's just good business.
Joanna, when we talk about that 32-hour work week, what are you hearing from your peers about, the saying, sometimes people say, work smarter, not harder. So what are you hearing about from your peers about wanting the, shorter hours in the office because they feel like they can get it done?
Yeah. And again, being a millennial, I'm sandwiched between those two generations where I hear, well, they're not taking this job as seriously. And then I'm also hearing, well, they don't value my work-life balance. And I just want to disband both right now by saying that, asking for a 32-hour week is asking for the ability to show up in a more refreshed and a more productive and a more ready to perform at their best capacity. I think another popular term that we hear a lot in the last couple of years is self-care. I think we've all have experienced the after and the impacts of COVID, which, we're not really necessarily past it necessarily, but in many ways, a lot of learning lessons from that is from Gen Z of acknowledging that in order for me to really show up and do the work and get these results in a shorter time, I really, really need to value my ability to recharge, my ability to spend time with family. I think a lot of Gen Xers, people who, were taught and the culture was to work these hours, and we're still feeling that right now. They do it because they want to give back. They do it because they want to provide for their families. So it's really getting down to the core and to the essence of the purpose of why everybody's meeting and, in an organization. It's because people want to have impact in the community. People want to provide for their families. People, I think everybody can agree that there's commonality among the generations when we show up to work. It's just the approach that we're wrestling with, right? And so that's what I would say is I would not take offense to it. I would take it as an opportunity to talk about, what values that they have, what are they looking for in their experience in that role.
Thank you, Joanna. Okay, well, another topic for discussion today is ageism in the workplace. We know it affects people, and a study by the Boston Globe shows that 62% of people over the age of 50 experience age discrimination. So, Denise, can you give us some insight on some things you've heard about this?
Yeah, I mean, ageism is real. There's no doubt about it. It happens. It's sometimes a bias from your hiring managers or the people that are hiring. It's sometimes an unconscious bias. People don't even realize that they're doing it. They may think, well, this person is of this age range, and therefore they wouldn't know the newest technology. Or this person is so young, they wouldn't have the experience that they probably need in this role. So it happens to younger people, it happens to older people. And I think what people really need to focus on is their strengths. What is the strength that that individual is bringing that matches what you need? Because every generation is equally valuable to the workforce. You just got to figure out what exactly the strengths that you need for that applicant to come in to do great work for your company.
And Matt, I'll go to you next. When we talk about ageism, and you're big about things happening in the workplace, what can you say to recruiters? What can you say to HR to remind them that this is a thing and that they need to be cognizant of the people applying for positions?
Well, Denise hit the nail on the head when she talked about this notion of both conscious and unconscious bias. And a lot of corporations, indeed included, are putting our recruiters through unconscious bias training to try and mitigate that and get it out of our thinking when we're interviewing and screening candidates. And that goes as far as to how we're framing questions. The questions that we do ask, are they legitimately around the skills and experience that someone needs and the capabilities to do the job, as opposed to whether or not they have X number of years of experience, too many or too few, or a specific degree. We've lopped off the degree requirements for many of our jobs, as have a variety of different organizations, governmental and otherwise, when it's a nice to have, but it's not necessarily a definition of what someone can do. And really, from a recruiting standpoint, it gets down to asking questions that elicit example-based answers that help you learn whether or not the person has the capabilities, the skills, and the experience to do the job, asking alignment questions that help you identify the extent to which what they're looking for out of work aligns with what you're looking for out of work in consistent ways across all applicants, so that you're screening all applicants in the same way. And then trying to take the potential of ageism or any other kind of ism out of the process as much as it possibly can.
So as they do these things to try to reach, everybody in these different generations, what's being done, Matt, and you can speak to this, about the technological advancements? For example, we know that the Gen Zs are, on the cusp of that. They were there. They know how to do all these things. How are companies trying to reach the other generations, say boomers or Gen Xers, and help them get trained to keep up with all of this advancement?
Well, it depends upon the organization, its type, its size, the industry that it's in. When you're in a technology industry like Indeed, there's, of course, a great focus on developing and advancing technological competencies of everyone in every discipline. But in a small business, it's a different situation. In a government entity, it's going to be a little different. I think there's an onus on employers to provide the training to their employees that they need in order to do the jobs that they need to have done. But I also think there's a certain element of personal responsibility that goes along with it. If it's as simple as, I just got this new iPhone 14, how the heck do I use it? To developing your own skills and using the software and pursuing the skill sets that you need to do your job. There's this element of self-career management. We can't depend upon our employers to manage our careers for us. We all have to do that ourselves. And that's a myth from way back when the social contract was, you go to an employer and you work with them and they'll take care of you. That persists, even though that fell apart a long time ago. We've really got to work towards managing our own careers and then partnering with our employers to develop the skills that we need.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, Joanna, as they say, there's two sides to every story. So when we talk about Gen Z, what are some things you're hearing? Do you often hear anything about ageism?
Yeah, I think when we think about ageism, we usually think about the experiences that the older generations are experiencing. And while that is very true and, a very real part of our experience in the recruiting process, it's also on the other side. I think a lot of young people feel that there is this sense of invalidation or less ability to show up and be prepared for something just because of their age, just because they are younger, they are less experienced, they don't have much to say. And something that I'm trying to do in my role as I talk to a lot of C-suite people, when I talk to a lot of community leaders in the organization, in organizations, is, think about young professionals in what they can teach you. So Matt made some references to this, and even I, as a millennial, as I was going up in my career, oftentimes my supervisor would come to me, who I looked up to a lot and had a lot of formal training in journalism, would come to me and ask me a lot of technical questions, a lot of advice on how we could pitch things on social media and things like that. And so you know, we can all learn from each other. And something that I would encourage just all of us. I think unconscious bias is unconscious because it lives in all of us, right? And so when we think about age, right, thinking specifically about the skills that somebody offers is really critical. So, you know, look, you can look at young professionals as leaders as well. It's not an age thing. It's not a this many years of experience. It's that is becoming outdated. And I will say Gen Z, they're hard to impress. So, for them, just tons of accolades on your resume is not going to impress them. And so think about it that way as well.
Thank you. And Matt, I want to follow up with you. You mentioned something just a minute ago about training and being in charge of your own fate and
Mhm.
finding things to help to advance your career. So when we talk about that, is a employee expected to pay for the training, or what are you seeing in the workplace? Will some professionals be able to go to a manager and say, "Hey, I'd love to have be trained in this, or I'd love to take this class"? How does that work?
Uh, Again, it's going to be different. I'll share the Indeed experience. We've got a suite of training that Indeed has, that every employee has access to through a variety of different providers. So whether it's to develop your competencies in search engine marketing, or developing your competencies in Excel or Qualtrics or any other platform, we have resources. And then individual employees are working with their managers to develop these training plans, so that you can identify what do you want to do that Indeed already has to offer you to help you develop and perhaps advance with Indeed first. And then the possibility of, is there training available that Indeed doesn't have already in-house or access to, that we may need to purchase for me? And then that gets tied to your career progression in your role. And there are times when Indeed and other companies will say, yes, that's not something we have. We will put you through that training. But then there's also stuff that you just want to develop because of your own curiosity or desire to learn. And then those are skills that you would develop at your own cost as well. So it's a mix. If it tends to be job related and the employer sees it as something, a skill that you need related to your job, chances of an employer picking up the cost for that training are much greater than if it's simply a skill that you want to develop yourself personally or professionally.
Joanna, any information about this? Have you heard from people or worked with groups who say this is something that some of the older generations are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to go back a little bit on my former question. And I hear from HR a lot of people in the field who are saying, it's easy to get people in the door. The challenge is really keeping them in an organization, and I think that's another phenomenon that we're seeing with this generation. Is not so much are they interested in roles or are they interested in working for organizations, but it's when they're in an organization, what is their cultural experience in an organization? What kind of support, what kind of trainings, what kind of, managerial support are they receiving that is making it worth their while? I think when we think about millennials, especially, I think we were and are tend to be really driven by career trajectories, and the opportunities to grow within an organization and be taken care of, like Matt was saying earlier. But Gen Z is not. Again, I want to emphasize that they aren't the bells and whistles of a career is not as appealing to them, and so I would really encourage HR to really think about that aspect of it.
Joanna, anything you'd like to add?
Oh, Denise. I think what Joanna is saying is true. I also think that we've done studies, many studies across the globe, and we find that Gen Z really wants three things. One, they want compensation that is fair and equitable to what they're doing. Compensation is very important to them. Two is benefits. We call them the throwback generation. They're very interested in the benefits that you are having as a company, especially after COVID. What are your medical benefits? What are your savings benefits, your 401k, retirement? This is a generation that we found 15% of them at the age of 12 were already saving for retirement. So this is an important aspect for them in careers. And then thirdly, also is I find that many companies, I've worked with companies, like I said, all over the world, is we use the tool of, yes, there's a way to expand your career here, but we don't put it in front of them and really give them a detailed plan of how to do this. And that is really important to retain, especially the younger generation, of putting that plan in place, letting them hit these metrics that are part of that plan, and then bringing them forward. When they have it in front of them, they're way more easier to progress and understand that you're keeping your promise to them.
Okay, Joanna, now I'll come back to you. Denise mentioned some things about 401k, about savings, and all the things that some of the Gen Xers and even some of the baby boomers, of course, they've been doing that. But when we talk about the millennials and Gen Z, are those things equally important, or where do they fall on the scale?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, who isn't driven by compensation and a really nice benefits package, right? But I will emphasize a lot of times, a lot of Gen Zers, even if they are paid, if they are expected to work, long hours, if they are, don't have access to that work-life balance, that often will drive them away. They're not afraid to be really explicit about, making sure that that kind of perfect trifecta is really met. The other thing I wanted to mention that I don't think is really brought up. I think this conversation is really focused in general terms, but when we think about where we are geographically, I mean, Austin, I think latest census data, it says 18 to 44-year-olds make up like almost half of the population here in Austin, which is insane to think about. And when you think about just the lifestyle here and the culture here, young people love to play. They love to really reap the benefits that they've made through their hard work. So, yes, compensation and I think benefits are key, but it's not just that. I think there has to be a balance with everything else. And again, want to emphasize this is not to generalize a whole group of people, but I have met Gen Zers that aren't too particular about what some a company's ESG goals are for the next 3 years. But I think it's really important to think of the context of where we are. A lot of young people, a lot of new Austinites are moving here for that life. They want that new lifestyle. And again, to emphasize the post-pandemic life, a lot of people kind of realized and are reflecting on kind of the life that they want to lead and how work fits into that. And so a lot of those people that have the privilege to move here, work remote jobs, they have that flexibility, they're well compensated and can afford this very inflated housing market here in Austin. It's because I really do believe they have that mix of three things.
Okay, Joanna, you just touched on a whole other topic with that housing market. That's another show. But I want to go back to Matt. They talked about compensation and how important it is to all the groups, of course. Let's talk about perks. I know Indeed has been at the forefront of having some really amazing workspaces here in Austin. Talk about perks and how they can come into play with attracting some of these employees.
Well, you get a company like Indeed in a lot of tech companies where our value innovation and value putting people into environments that will allow them to continually innovate. And some of those things result in perks. So at a company like Indeed, where there's breakfast and there's lunch and there's recreational lounge areas to get people together, not just around a desk or in a meeting room, to converse and come up with ideas. And from a productivity standpoint, to save them the time of having to go and get something else. That can be very, very beneficial, both from a pocketbook standpoint, but from a lifestyle standpoint, and from a work productivity standpoint. So when large employers like Indeed can offer these can be differentiators and can draw candidates to us that might go to other employers. If you can get your workout in, have your meal, play some music, and never have to leave where you parked your car in the morning when you came into the office, or even do some of that online, that can be a real benefit. And larger companies like Indeed in the tech space offer those kinds of perks. But that's not the only kind of perks. Some perks are simply flexibility. We actually did a study of Gen Z job seekers in partnership with Denise's company, the Center for Generational Kinetics. And one of the survey responses we got said that a large percentage of Gen Z would take less money for a job that offered them more flexibility. So think about perks more broadly than just, do they have coffee, or do they have lunch, or do they have a gym? But what are the things that are really important to the different generations, and can you provide them so that they can feel productive at work, feel at home at work, and feel they're in an authentic environment? I think if there's something that, what I have observed, because I'm not, Gen Z, they value authenticity in everything so much. Answers that are, why do we do it? Because we've always done it that way, don't resonate very well with them. Give them an honest, authentic answer, and you can win them over. It's a broad statement, I know, but I think more so than many generations, authenticity is something that is top of mind for many of the Gen Z that I have interacted with and studied.
Great information, Matt. Okay, we just had a question to come in, and Denise, we'll see if you can get this one. It says, what about trainings? Is there any jobs or anything, Matt, that you may even know of, where companies are offering training to the employees so they can learn how to communicate? Because as you guys have said throughout this past hour, that the different generations have different ways of learning, different ways of working. So is there something involved with training that can help them better communicate in the office?
So I'll tell you a little personal story on this one. So every year our company hires interns in partnership with an organization here in Austin. And this intern been working with us for about a month and a half, doing a fantastic job. I asked him to send an email to a C-suite person with my name on it. He typed it up. He came in about 20 minutes later and he said, I have a question. I said, what's the question? He's like, can I put emojis on this email that I'm sending to this C-suite person? And I said, no, we don't do that. And I realized then, and I'm in the space, that I hadn't really had a conversation with him about etiquette on sending emails to C-suites and the way that we wanted to be presented in our company, et cetera. And, luckily enough for me, he was aware enough to come and ask the question. And that actually sparked conversations within our company and other companies I always tell the story to, is that this should be part of your onboarding. Like, let people understand how you want for your company to be represented and communicated with, so that everybody's aligned. So I'm not sure if there's like direct places for this type of training, but I think most companies should at least have a conversation and provide examples of the way that they want communication protocol to go. And that goes for all your channels. It might be different on email versus on Slack versus on Twitter versus internal, external. But people need to be aware of that in order for them to be able to understand what to follow.
Excellent. Okay, so we're coming to a close and we have some few minutes left, but I like to leave people with a call to action, something they can do in the workplace to make it better for themselves or their coworkers. Any tips, insights that each of you can give? And I'll start with Joanna. As we talk about these millennials and Gen Zs and navigating the workplace with, baby boomers and Gen Xers, what are some insight or tips you could give?
Absolutely. I'm going to do a shameless plug first. We actually have our leadership summit coming up at the end of the spring, and one of the sessions is actually talking about this topic, talking about how to manage teams that are multi-generational, that are hybrid, that are, remote, that are in person. And then we're also going to have a session for HR professionals on, how to retain this generation. So you can go to austinYC.org and you can sign up for our newsletter, which will give you updates on a weekly basis. But just a more direct way to your question, thinking about Gen Z and their, Matt called it authenticity. I think that's spot on. I think having just real conversations and real connections with your staff really goes a long way. The beautifully packaged, onboarding process, the beautifully packaged benefits language on your job description is really not, it's going to pique interest. It's going to establish a communication path, but it's not really going to do the work. So I really charge leaders, no matter your age, no matter what generation you fall on, to really bring that authenticity to your leadership style. So whether that's grabbing a coffee on a regular basis to talk about that person, just their life, their interests, what they think about the organization, what they think about the team, what they think about how they're performing in this quarter, et cetera. I really think building those connections, really goes a long way.
Thank you, Joanna. Denise, can you speak on this and talk about maybe perhaps how we can learn to appreciate the differences in all the generations in the workplace?
Yeah, no, exactly. So I really want people to remember that what we talked about here today is really clues and insights to a particular preference, the way people are. Not everybody's going to fit in this neat box. So one, remember that. Two, remember that every generation is equally valuable. So when you put a team together, if you can, of each generation within that team so they can really draw on each other's strengths. Matt said it perfectly, that there can be reciprocal training between the both of them, and that they can respond and give the company the best product that they can as a team that brings together so much insight.
Thank you, Matt.
As we get older, and I can say that because I'm getting older, we have more and more opportunities to develop habits and to get set in our ways. And so I guess the advice that I would give is to seek first to understand and not to be understood by the people that you're bringing into your organization, regardless of the generation that they're in or that you're in. They're desperately trying to understand the workplace that they're coming into and what standards exist and what the expectations are beyond the job description. And as a manager, if you're bringing people onto your team, particularly Gen Z, but again, any generation, if you seek to try and understand where they're coming from and what their motivations are and what their approaches and work styles are, then you both can work towards adapting to each other and playing off of each other's strengths. And I think when you bring multiple generations together onto a work team or into an organization, you bring a multitude of strengths that we can capitalize on. And then we all have our various weaknesses that the others can help us lift up. That's sort of a rising tide raises all boats kind of a notion.
Excellent advice from all of our panelists. They are definitely the subject matter experts. They've talked about social and cultural differences in the generations. They've talked about work experiences. They've talked about benefits and perks and the things that the different generations are looking for. So I just encourage each of you to take this information, move forward, and embrace it. Remember, it starts with you. Of course, I'd like to thank our panelists, Denise Villa, Joanna Ortiz, and Matt Burnt, for joining us today. This is a conversation where someone can listen in and take something away from it and try to make it better in their workplace. We thank each of you for watching and listening to all of this advice today. On behalf of Austin PBS, I'm Santa Henderson. Thank you for joining us.